Story 1. I believe everyone should have their driving ability evaluated periodically. Some individuals become complacent and drive erratically. Story 2. How do you know when individuals have crossed the line into being dangerous if you do not test it? It makes perfect sense to conduct driving tests as you age. Story 3. After a certain age, we should test everyone. Having someone act as an arbiter on who is and is not in good health is significantly more complicated than simply requiring the elderly to take a single day every couple of years to prove they are still mentally and physically competent enough to operate a vehicle. Story 4. I had to call the police on an elderly woman driving a car without a license plate, swerving all over the road at 9 a.m. I did feel bad, but my great-grandmother had a valid license at 90, even though she was legally blind. This makes me question the reliability of the licensing process. Story 5. It is absolutely necessary to address this. I know an older individual who has never been in an accident, yet they are so uncomfortable driving and drive so awkwardly that I choose not to ride in their car. Story 6. I think it is good. Elderly individuals have slower reactions and do not make the best judgments on the road. Story 7. I agree with the laws being passed. I am in favor of everyone having to retake their driving tests each time they renew their driving licenses. Story 8. With a relatively healthy person, they often do not notice the slow decline in their capabilities. If you are ill or injured, you notice the sudden change and, if sensible, adjust accordingly. In an ideal world, with the right manpower to run it, reassessments would be a good idea every 5 to 10 years for everyone. Story 9. I agree, in South Florida, you see a lot of elderly individuals driving recklessly. I feel sympathy because if I were that old, I would want independence, but some of them pose a legitimate danger on the road. Story 10. With the number of poor drivers I see on the roads here in Canada, I believe everyone should be tested periodically. Story 11. When I went to get my real ID, they accidentally sent me to the line for the written exam. I already had my license and wasn't expecting to take that test again, so when I did, I failed it. I thought they were going to revoke my license, but no. They said they sent me to the wrong line and I didn't have to take the test. I think many people, regardless of age, would fail that test if they had to retake it. Story 12. I think everyone would need to be aware of this stage. Apparently, we have seen an increase in poor drivers since COVID-19. Story 13. I just got my grandmother's old car. She finally lost her license. It's a nice car other than the huge dents and scratches from her hitting things. She is 94 and has been a dangerous driver for over 10 years. Everyone should take a driver's test every 10 years and every 5 years after the age of 65. Dangerous individuals should not be driving. Story 14. It is a good idea to keep the public safe. I know a few older individuals who drove well past the time they should have stopped. Story 15. Any age should undergo testing, especially after an accident. My office conducts fitness for work assessments after traumatic brain injuries, cancer, and similar conditions. This service is sorely needed. Story 16. We need better public transportation options and fully autonomous vehicles before we deprive people of their only means of mobility, especially at an age when they may have no friends or family left to assist them. Personally, I have never been involved in an accident or pulled over in over a decade of driving, yet I doubt I could pass an exam without studying if you transported me to a testing station right now. Story 17. I renewed my license just before I turned 67 late last year. I will have to take a test in 4 years, and I assume that by that time I should receive some scrutiny. Story 18. I believe that every individual of legal driving age should take a test and renew their driver's license annually. I am in my 60s, but this requirement should apply to everyone. Story 19. It is a question of statistical risks. The risks of serious medical issues increase with age. It is easy for someone to conceal a medical problem that clearly affects their ability to drive. In my province, when someone is diagnosed with an ailment such as sleep apnea or cataracts, or has an episode like a stroke, heart attack, or seizure, the physician or hospital is required by law to notify the Ministry of Transportation. While this is beneficial, we cannot rely solely on proper diagnosis, as some individuals may avoid visiting the doctor for that reason. Therefore, it is advisable to implement a blanket requirement for a quick driving test on a regular basis. Even so, there are those who can still pass the driving test while concealing certain issues. As long as the tests can be scheduled and conducted within a reasonable time frame, it should not be a problem. By default, in Ontario, individuals aged 65 to 79 must take a test every 5 years. For those aged 80 and older, testing is required annually, provided they have a clear medical record. If specific medical issues are present, testing frequency may be determined by the physician and the Ministry of Transportation. To be honest, I would suggest that everyone take a simple driving test every 5 years. Story 20. Eyesight, hearing, and motor functions reduce with age, increasing the possibility of accidents with fatal results. It is for your own safety and the safety of others. Story 21. I believe everyone should retake the test occasionally. Perhaps every 10 years until they turn 65, then every 5 years until they turn 80, and then annually after that. Story 22. There is a decline in reflexes and sometimes other physical capabilities as we age. Given the potential harm that a poorly driven vehicle can inflict, I think it is sensible to retest driving skills. Story 23. You are in good health with a good driving record until you aren't. Just because someone might not have wrecked yet doesn't mean they should be driving. I would prefer they take a test rather than find out they shouldn't be driving anymore after they drive their car into a group of people due to undiagnosed medical issues. I kept tripping when I walked, even on flat concrete, and I couldn't figure out why until I realized I couldn't feel my foot and I was not lifting it as far as I thought, causing the tip of my foot to catch on the ground. I am only in my 40s. Story 24. Everyone should have to retake a driver's test every 4 years, and the test should be more comprehensive, covering topics such as what to do in emergency situations, evasive actions, and driving in adverse weather, similar to other modernized countries around the world. Story 25. I live in Florida. I completely agree that testing for drivers as they age needs to be done. Older individuals can be more hazardous on the roads than younger ones. My mother-in-law, 6 months before we made her stop driving, renewed her license. She had suffered a stroke the year before, and dementia had set in. After she hit a parked car, ran into an automatic gate, and finally ran off the road and bounced off a guardrail, my wife and brother-in-law finally listened to me and forced her to stop driving. She was a significant risk while driving. Now, 3 years later, she still thinks she can drive just fine. The poor woman forgets she lives with us and sometimes gets dressed, saying it's time for her to go home to Miami, where she hasn't lived for 30 years. There's no way for anyone to know if a person in their 70s is healthy and cognitively capable of driving without testing. Your statement alone is not proof. Story 26. I support this. People decline with age, and just because they don't get caught for violations does not mean they haven't engaged in dangerous behavior. Tailgating should be treated the same as driving under the influence. Story 27. I support the idea of requiring everyone to recertify every 5 to 10 years until a certain age, let's say 65. After reaching 65, recertification should be every 2 to 3 years. Story 28. I believe everyone should retake a multiple-choice test every 5 years. It should be quick and easy. I would bet a noticeable percentage of people would not pass. Story 29. I feel good about it. I live in an area with many elderly people, and a good portion of them should not still have their licenses. Story 30. It's important to address this issue. Older individuals can lose their faculties quickly and may disregard the advice of their adult children regarding giving up driving. Additionally, it is worth noting that baby boomers are often reluctant to give up or compromise on anything. However, it is necessary for the safety of all road users. Story 31. I believe there should be regulations for individuals over 70. However, there should also be incentives for younger drivers to retake driving courses. For example, retaking the test could extend a 2-year registration renewal to 3 years. Story 32. I didn't give a speech on this in college. Based on my research and personal experiences, I believe that elderly individuals should take a driving test every year. Story 33. My grandfather was still driving with a valid license in the UK at 96. He was a terrible driver and really could not see. He should have been retested. Story 34. I get so upset about this because it will hurt their feelings. I don't care about their feelings when people's lives are on the line, including my own. My husband's grandfather can no longer stay in his own lane and hasn't been able to for a while. He tried to convince us that it was okay to just hold our 8-month-old in our lap on the way to the airport because the car seat was in the other car. He almost drove someone off the road and didn't realize it was because he had just changed lanes unconsciously. His doctor insisted that he has to stop driving at night, but he believes he knows what he is doing. He likes his independence and doesn't want to burden other people. My husband's aunts refuse to set boundaries with him and take his keys away. Whenever it comes up, their argument is that he likes his independence and it would upset him. My husband once offered to drive his grandfather's car instead of him because it was late, and the man was offended and amazed that my husband had the audacity to offer. Do not wait until he hits someone, gets injured himself, or kills someone. This is so important. Their feelings are not more important, and it is your responsibility to enforce this. Yes, I do think these tests should happen because if a teenager were making the same mistakes, they would never get their license. Story 35. I am not against it, but what defines good health? Does vision fall under that category? I am not saying it is acceptable, but every younger person I know who drives recklessly and makes poor decisions while driving is aware that they are making mistakes. It is foolish and they should be ashamed. In contrast, every older person I know who drives poorly seems completely unaware of their mistakes. Story 36. I feel like it's not enough. My mother, who is nearly blind, still has her license. She doesn't drive because she is not foolish, but none of her many doctors has revoked her license. People do not self-report, and doctors do not report them as much as they should. We should all be taking a new test every 5 years or so. It's ridiculous that we do not hold drivers to a higher standard. Story 37. My grandpa almost caused an accident driving us to dinner at 80, then spent the entire dinner complaining about it. Later, a television show created an episode that captured everyone's feelings about the situation. I apologize, but if you need a walker, it's time to accept your limitations. Story 38. I feel confident about it. Just as in aviation, when pilots reach a certain age, they become obligated to undergo medical examinations more frequently. We all know that health can deteriorate quickly. Let's not rely on the general public to report any issues, as that would be a recipe for disaster. Story 39. Not necessarily a whole test, but an hour's unguided drive with a licensed instructor to determine if you need either a few refresher lessons or a full retest. This should be done at 60, 70, and 75, then yearly. Story 40. It is a great idea. Eyesight and reaction times deteriorate, and people often text while driving. Story 41. My mother-in-law is about 80 years old. She has no depth perception and is losing her hearing. However, her health is excellent. Her driver's license is still valid, and she insists that she drives just fine. I wish there were a requirement for retesting. Story 42. When I worked as a cart pusher for Walmart, I was almost hit by a car around 10 times. All of these incidents involved elderly drivers who were squinting and sometimes barely able to see over the steering wheel. Regular reevaluation, especially at an older age, should be the norm. Story 43. The man who hit me was in his 70s and blind in one eye. He should never have had a driver's license. It is essential for individuals to demonstrate good health and eyesight. Story 44. I believe everyone should be reevaluated periodically, and the standards should be higher than they currently are in my country. Some individuals' mental fitness declines more quickly than others. In that context, I find it concerning to see the number of elderly drivers who operate vehicles poorly. Their slow reaction times can pose significant dangers. Story 45. I work in surgical trauma and just had a patient who was run over by his elderly wife because she thought the gas pedal was the brake. I believe that retesting after a certain age would be a wise decision. Story 46. Have you ever worked in a parking lot on a senior day? It leaves you feeling anxious about being on the road, and that is just a parking lot. Story 47. I fully support it. Every negligent accident I have been involved in included a person of advanced age. This is my attempt at expressing it respectfully. Story 48. There is a patient at my workplace, an elderly woman in her 80s, who struggles with early-onset Alzheimer's disease. She had her driver's license revoked and does not remember the reason. Although she will be retaking her driving test, it is likely best for her not to be on the road. Elderly individuals over 80 should not be driving. Story 49. I support the idea of testing the driver in front of me. Their skills are so poor that I can barely check my phone without fearing a crash. Story 50. Is there really a valid argument against it, other than the fact that it is inconvenient for some people? We all know it would be highly beneficial for numerous reasons. I have yet to see a single argument against this. Story 51. I believe there should be an upper age limit for driving, similar to the age requirement for obtaining a first license. Story 52. Would you give a driver's license to Donald Trump so he could drive the streets of New York City or Washington, D.C.? An angry, flustered grandpa behind the wheel who doesn't believe in driving laws and truly believes he owns the roads? Story 53. How do we know individuals are in good health? If there is data showing that at a certain age, people become more dangerous drivers due to a decline in abilities, it would make sense to implement reevaluations. It seems reasonable that everyone should be regularly reevaluated. I am unsure why this is not already a common practice. Perhaps the cost is not considered worthwhile. Story 54. I support frequent testing for everyone. Studies show that most drivers believe they are better drivers than they actually are. Story 55. My grandmother was supposedly a fine driver until she developed some eye issues and dementia. She then started crossing the center line and told my mom they were repainting the roads to make the lanes smaller. So the lines didn't really matter. Story 56. A poorly written law would only include stipulations for written, driving, and vision tests. A well-written law would consider increased access to public transportation and discounts for taxis and rideshare services. Older adults continue to drive because they still have places to go. Story 57. My father is over 80 and is in great health. He has backed into someone at least every other month. Yes, after a certain age, a driving test should be mandatory. Story 58. If there is actual data showing that the rate of accidents and other harm to people or their property, it is perfectly constitutional. That is how we got driver's licenses, license plates, and mandatory minimums for auto insurance. Because people and their property were being harmed at unreasonable levels, and steps were taken to protect everyone from such harm and ensure they are made whole. Story 59. I agree with it. Most people lose various functions as they age that are critical for driving, and often they are not fully aware of it. It is for everyone's safety that individuals get assessed periodically to ensure they are still capable of safely operating what can be a lethal machine. Story 60. And how are you determining good health? Frankly, I believe everyone should be required to retake the driving test every 10 years. Many people struggle with driving, not just the elderly. However, older individuals often drive in a manner that is more slow and unsafe rather than fast and unsafe. Additionally, we need to implement a recurring parking test because many people struggle with that as well. Story 61. It's good because how will they know if someone has cognitively declined to the point of being a hazard without testing them? It's not like they can access people's health records, and individuals often lie to keep driving even when they know they are a hazard. It's a good idea. Story 62. How else would we know they are in good health and able to drive well? This situation is less of an inconvenience if they are retired, but it would annoy me more now with work and children. Story 63. The decreased response times can drop suddenly in some cases and may not be gradual at all. Honestly, we might need to conduct cognitive tests on every driver these days due to the poor performance of many. Of course, there are exceptions. Paul Newman was able to drive high-end race cars almost until he passed away, having been racing for decades. However, being in the sport, you would be amazed to see driving ability decline even among younger drivers as they age. So, do I think individuals aged 70 to 90 should be tested for driving a minimum 2-ton vehicle? Absolutely. Just look at Florida or Arizona during snowbird season. Story 64. Everyone should retest every 5 to 7 years. Have you seen how people drive? It's not just the elderly. Story 65. The old lady who lives across the street backs out of her driveway and stops when she hits something. It is usually the curb, but it has been other cars 3 times. We warn visitors not to park in her path. Story 66. It should absolutely be required. Frankly, it helps families as well. The discussions that families have with their elderly parents are often complicated and frustrating, leading to conflicts. It is much kinder for families if the authorities take away their licenses. Many others are also advocating for this requirement, and while I believe it is fair, it is not as urgent. There are real, measurable declines that occur in old age that can impact driving significantly more than in younger age groups. Story 67. Nearing 51. I support this. My eyes and reflexes have diminished significantly. It is only arrogance to suggest that we should not be tested. Testing every 5 years until our 80s, and then annually seems reasonable. It should not cost individuals anything. This is for public safety, not profit. Story 68. I believe everyone should retake the test every few years. Some individuals should not have passed initially. Story 69. I don't know. On one hand, this is a clear choice. On the other hand, there will be people who will not be allowed to drive while living in places where the only viable transportation option is driving, and there is little interest, let alone a push, to create alternative options. Story 70. Age aside, a certain number of tickets should trigger this as well. I have never received a ticket in my 10 years of driving. I hear about people who get them regularly. What are they actually doing? Story 71. I think it's reasonable to require periodic driving tests starting at a mature age, perhaps 65, and then every 5 years after that. I wouldn't oppose infrequent earlier tests at ages 30, 40, and 50 because drivers often develop poor habits, and earlier tests might help identify and correct them. The biggest issue with testing is that some individuals may find themselves without transportation options if they fail. The solution is not to allow them to drive anyway. We need better transportation alternatives, at least in the United States, so those individuals are not left without options. Story 72. It needs to be done, but it should also be offered at no cost, with heavily discounted transportation options for those who do not pass. Story 73. If it weren't for the burden on the system and the expense that would be incurred by citizens, everyone should have to retest every 4 years. Given the impracticality of such a requirement, only retesting older individuals is age discrimination. Instead, you should lose your license after a certain number of infractions. Story 74. My grandpa was in good health, had a good driving record, and could do complex math in his head faster than most people when he was in his early 90s. He also refused to stop driving recklessly, even though he clearly didn't have the reaction time to safely maneuver, like cutting across 3 lanes of traffic to pass a truck on the right. So yes, I wish there was a law requiring anyone over the age of 75 to take an annual driving test. I also wish that the test included a basic reaction time test and a letter from an optometrist stating that the applicant has sufficient vision. Story 75. Take the responsibility of managing health insurance away from people, and instead, implement universal health care. This would allow individuals to focus on chauffeuring elderly individuals, likely resulting in lower overall costs. Story 76. To be honest, people are so reckless on the roads that everyone should have to retake their driving tests periodically. It is a several thousand-pound object hurtling at speeds up to 85 miles per hour, 137 kilometers per hour, often even faster on a highway. Individuals should have to prove they can still operate it safely. Story 77. Absolutely, I have witnessed firsthand the mental decline of older adults and the loss of concentration while driving. It's scary. They definitely need to be tested regularly. Story 78. I work in geriatrics. As I explain to my patients, it's not about steering your car to the store. It's about reaction times if a child runs in front of you. Story 79. Do you know what cataracts are? They are a clump of proteins from the lens that block sight. This occurs in everyone's eyes eventually. Yes, every single person will develop cataracts and may need surgery to remove them. Not all cataracts will severely damage your sight, but we cannot be too sure that you can safely drive. Therefore, we should ensure everyone of a certain age gets tested. It's not because they are old and slow. In fact, they may be more spry than you think. They just sometimes literally cannot see well, which can create significant blind spots. This is not good. Story 80. Eyes have crystalline lenses that become clouded with age. This occurs in every person with eyes. The change is gradual, so some individuals may not realize they see 20/30ths vision or worse. For this reason, it is essential for people to have, at the very least, a vision test to drive as they age. There are well-reasoned arguments for requiring vision tests to drive after a certain age, just as there are reasons to test individuals when they are young. The positive freedom of driving needs to be balanced against the negative consequences of causing accidents. We can debate methods to achieve that balance, but we cannot debate the necessity of assessments. Story 81. The reason those laws exist is that we become complacent. Some people have been driving for 45 years, and then they fall back on how they always did it, accumulating many bad habits and arrogance. You, the reader, might not be one of them, but some other person might be. Without a reliable way to check, the easiest solution is to reevaluate everyone. This could simplify the process. While this approach may waste time and resources for everyone, it has the potential to save lives. In other words, not doing it puts lives at risk, both for individuals and others, in the name of saving time and resources. That doesn't seem like a reasonable approach, especially for something as critical as driving or traveling. Story 82. I think everyone should be tested every 10 years. Personally, I believe it would be challenging, but it would be worth it for the greater good. I would like to see testing as part of a support system rather than purely punitive. This means having quality driving schools, both classroom and practical, available at low or no cost to anyone who needs them. Additionally, it is important to increase the availability of alternative transportation options in every community. If alternative transportation were more viable, it would address many issues related to people driving beyond their limits. Story 83. Good. Honestly, it should be evaluated more than once in your life. The number of young and middle-aged people in my area who do not use their turn signals and change lanes as if they are in a video game is excessive. Story 84. It will happen to me too. It is just a feature of life. If you do not want to deal with that, you might consider dying younger. Story 85. I am currently having this discussion with my father. You should choose to stop driving at least one day before you need to stop. The problem is that no one knows when that day is. Age is not the only reason you can't drive, but it is one reason doctors can revoke your license. Age is a strong predictor, and just because you think you are fine does not mean you are. No system is perfect. You could ask what percentage of 70-year-olds would actually fail driving tests. Then consider how quickly you might decline or have an event that impairs your cognitive or physical capacity between tests that you may not recognize. Conditions like dementia are not instantaneous. You could probably drive safely for 2 or 3 years after the first signs of dementia, possibly longer with medication. Therefore, periodic testing of older drivers makes sense. Certainly for those around 80 years old, arguably starting at 75, but probably not under 70 since it involves a lot of testing for almost no benefit. When scaled to millions of tests a year, it costs hundreds of millions of dollars to determine how many people should be taken off the road. Eventually, it encourages individuals nearing that point to consider the possibility they may fail, and it's worth considering backup plans. You could create a periodic test of road rules, but to some degree we already have that. It is called driving. If you can't follow the rules, you are likely to cause an accident, and although the objective might be to minimize accidents, testing millions of people costs hundreds of millions of dollars at a minimum and is only a single sample. Story 86. I am okay with it, but if it becomes a reality, elderly people and everyone else will need better access to transportation. Ride-sharing services are very expensive and often unreliable. Just because someone is older does not mean they do not still have errands and other tasks that others may not be interested in helping them with. Story 87. I like it, honestly. If younger people pay more for insurance because they are considered more of a danger on the road, I do not see why individuals over a certain age should not be tested more often to ensure they are not a danger on the road as well. Story 88. It is bold of people to think that retaking a test will change the behavior of bad drivers. They may drive well enough to pass the test but will likely revert to their bad habits. Additionally, revoking licenses from elderly individuals will not significantly impact the situation. Many people who have had their licenses revoked for drunk driving continue to drive. Furthermore, many undocumented individuals drive without a license. It is important to consider that those driving without a license are unlikely to have insurance. Story 89. I think it's smart. My grandmother was driving until she went into the hospital for surgery and never came out. She went to rehabilitation and then was readmitted before passing away in the hospital. She should not have been driving in her 80s. She was never a good driver, but it got even worse in the last year before she passed. My parents had put a wall in our driveway, and she drove into it with her car. Thankfully, not much damage was done, but it was literally 3 weeks before she had surgery, and we were trying to find a way to have her stop. When you have someone so fiercely independent who lives alone, it's hard to tell them to give up that independence. Also, when I was on a permit for getting my license, I was driving a driving school car, and an older woman rear-ended it. I was at a stoplight, and she claimed it was sunny, but I don't know how it can be so sunny that you can't see a stopped car just feet in front of you. Our bodies don't work the same as we get older, and the skills needed to be a competent driver just aren't there. Story 90. I'm 68, so it's a sensitive subject. I don't really have a problem with it, though. I worked for years in a family practice doctor's office. We had several elderly patients who were not competent. Generally, their children took their keys eventually without the doctor getting involved. We did have one older man who was quite wealthy and owned a sizable business. He wrecked about 5 cars in a year, didn't report them to his insurance, and just paid cash to repair his car and any damage he caused. In that case, the doctor did contact the Department of Public Safety. He was an absolute menace behind the wheel, without a doubt. Story 91. I feel really good about it. Everyone should be required to complete the written test and eye exam every few years, and after a certain age, the frequency should increase to include the behind-the-wheel driving portion. I believe you should also be required to take the full behind-the-wheel test if you are pulled over for driving erratically. Story 92. I believe that most drivers should be retested every 10 years. From my observation, many drivers would likely not pass their tests if they were assessed on the spot. There are a significant number of unqualified drivers on the road. Story 93. Laws should not be based on feelings. Any insurance company can calculate at what age the likelihood of a crash becomes statistically significant. That is the age to enforce the law. I would support that legislation. Story 94. My mom is 70 years old. She drove for work for 36 years, stopping around the age of 65. Last year, after leaving the grocery store, she inadvertently pulled into oncoming traffic and only realized it when she saw headlights approaching her. The elderly should certainly retake driving tests. Story 95. I don't see how it isn't a logical thought that this would serve a socially beneficial purpose. However, I especially don't understand why this wasn't established as a driving tax by the states. I have had 2 professional licenses, and for each one, the state extracts between $400 and $1,000 from me every year or two. They support an entire industry dedicated to generating revenue from maintaining accreditation. Yet, when it comes to obtaining a driving license, which is arguably much more critical for ensuring that a person can safely operate a vehicle, they do not try to extract the same level of revenue. I have been charged several hundred to over $1,000 to register my car in various states. How is it that in a world where everything is nickel and dimed, the driving license is not subjected to the same treatment, especially when that could actually be beneficial? Story 96. All people should be tested. Everyone has the right to drive once they have earned that privilege. Story 97. Most people who have watched their parents age and refuse to stop driving despite age-related cognitive and physical decline understand why this is necessary. Story 98. Cognitive decline is real. While most of it is age-related, it can happen to anyone. If testing causes people to reread the rules of the road to pass a test, that isn't necessarily a terrible thing. I believe everyone should be retested periodically. However, after a certain age, a significant number of individuals in that age group start to experience cognitive decline, making more frequent testing reasonable. I suggest retesting every 7 years for the general population, shifting to every 5 years starting at age 60, and then every 3 years after age 75 unless there is better guidance available. Story 99. It is not solely due to their age. Rather, their age often significantly reduces their ability to drive safely. Story 100. Purely because of age suggests that age is arbitrary, but it is not. It is a fact that people's eyesight declines over time and their bodies deteriorate. There is a significant difference between an 80-year-old and a 25-year-old. That is reality. Therefore, I believe it would be beneficial. Story 101. I fully support the idea of driving and traveling at your leisure as it is a privilege. However, being in command of 2 tons of rolling steel powered by explosions comes with significant responsibility. I want there to be guardrails in place to ensure that the elderly, and let's be honest, this applies to everyone, can drive as safely as possible. At the same time, I am currently against it because, as an American, I recognize that reliable and extensive public transportation is the exception rather than the rule. Therefore, I will advocate for improved public transportation everywhere and encourage the retaking of driver's tests at certain ages. Story 102. Father Time is undefeated. Over time, faculties decline, creating unintentionally dangerous drivers. If the state would allocate enough staff to conduct the tests fairly, safely, and quickly, the only insult would be to the driver who can no longer pass. Story 103. I support this initiative. I believe driving tests should be conducted more frequently. I understand it can be inconvenient, but it ultimately benefits society. Story 104. I absolutely support it. In Ontario, where I live, I believe the age at which you have to retake the test is 80. I will be there in about 9 years and will be happy to comply. Story 105. Society should do this only if it wants to save lives. Especially in the age of ride-sharing services, this frequent check is wise. Story 106. Maybe not for everyone, but retesting may be necessary for individuals who have been in accidents or received tickets. Story 107. They need to overhaul the driving standards and requirements for a license in the United States. There are too many people, regardless of age, who should not be on the road. Story 108. I think there should be a device that is placed in a car to record and transmit data. The driver can be evaluated based on their performance. Insurance companies already use similar technology. Why not implement it? Thanks a bunch for sticking around till the end of the video. Remember to subscribe, and until next time, stay awesome and goodbye.